In the early hours of April 18, 2016, Terry Bevers, popularly known as Missy, a beloved fitness instructor, was found murdered inside a church in Midlothian, Texas. The killer? Still unknown. The motive? Still a mystery. The chilling details of this case would leave anyone wondering. Who could do this to someone so kind-hearted, and why? Missy Bevers was the type of person everyone liked. With a warm smile and a personality that could light up any room, she had built a life that many admired. A fitness instructor who taught early morning boot camps at the Creekside Church in Midlothian, Texas, she was known for her energy and passion for health. Her students loved her for her genuine approach and infectious positivity. Missy wasn't just a fitness instructor. She was a mentor, a friend, and a mother. On the morning of April 18, 2016, Missy arrived at the Creekside Church as usual, preparing for her 5 a.m. fitness class. But by 5:30 a.m., the church, usually filled with the sound of people exercising and laughing, became the scene of something horrific. Missy was found dead inside the church, struck down in the middle of her class before anyone had even arrived. The police soon discovered that Missy had been brutally attacked. She was found wearing workout gear, her phone still in her possession, and her personal items undisturbed. It didn't appear to be a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't a random act of violence either. This was something far more chilling. It was around 4 a.m. when a suspicious figure entered the Creekside Church. The church's surveillance cameras, which had been set up to monitor premises, captured a person dressed in full tactical gear, including a helmet, vest, and face mask. The footage was eerie. The figure moved calmly, methodically, almost as if they had been there before. They wandered through the church halls and eventually into the area where Missy would be teaching her class. It was only when Missy arrived at 5 a.m. that the situation took a tragic turn. At this point, there's still very little clarity about the exact sequence of events. What is certain, however, is that Missy, a trained fitness professional, was no stranger to physical exertion. She knew her surroundings well and had been at the church many times before. Yet, in those final moments, she was caught off guard by someone who appeared to be waiting for her, hiding in plain sight. The most disturbing detail? The killer was able to strike Missy while she was vulnerable, inside a church, a place that she and many others considered safe. The killer had planned the attack carefully, arriving before Missy's class started, striking with precision, and then vanishing without leaving a trace. No fingerprints, no DNA, just a carefully executed murder that left more questions than answers. As the police combed through the footage from the church's security cameras, they were left with one undeniable conclusion. Whoever the killer was, they were not an amateur. The masked figure, who appeared to be familiar with the layout of the church, had been in and out of the building quickly and efficiently. The person did not act erratically or impulsively. They were cold, deliberate, and strategic. The first major lead came from the footage itself. The figure was wearing a set of tactical clothing, something typically associated with military or law enforcement professionals. But the most unsettling detail was the way they moved, deliberate, controlled, and confident. The investigators began to suspect that whoever committed the murder might have had some level of training or experience. A closer look at the footage raised even more chilling possibilities. The figure appeared to be wearing a costume, possibly designed to look like a member of law enforcement, further adding to the mystery of the killer's true identity. But with no solid leads or personal connections to Missy that could explain why she was targeted, the case became a baffling enigma. Was this a case of personal vendetta, or was Missy simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Why would someone, clearly familiar with the church, choose to kill her in such a brutal, calculated manner? Join us as we continue to unravel the chilling details of this case, revealing surprising twists and exploring the mysterious person who may hold the key to solving Missy Bevers' murder. As the investigation unfolded, multiple theories about the motive began to emerge. Could Missy's murder have been the result of a personal dispute? At the time of her death, she was married to her high school sweetheart, Brandon Bevers. However, their marriage had its challenges. Some speculated that Missy had been involved in an affair, though there was no concrete evidence to support this. The possibility of a relationship gone wrong couldn't be ruled out. There was a chance that someone from Missy's personal life, perhaps a jealous ex or a frustrated spouse, might have been responsible for the murder. But the more investigators dug into her background, the less clear this theory seemed to be. Another theory emerged based on the killer's strange and methodical behavior. Was Missy's killer someone who had stalked her? Someone who was familiar with her routine? Had they been watching her for days, or even weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike? The church's security footage seemed to suggest this. The killer's calm demeanor, their awareness of the building, and their readiness to execute the murder all pointed to someone who had studied the victim and the environment carefully. One of the most puzzling aspects of this case, and one that has captivated true crime enthusiasts and investigators alike, is the figure in the surveillance footage. The mask, the tactical gear, the careful movements, they all indicated that the killer was someone who had been planning this for some time. The mask hid the person's identity, and the tactical clothing made it difficult to determine their size, gender, or any other distinguishing features. Was the killer a man or a woman? Did the killer have military training, or was this an elaborate ruse to confuse the police? The chilling truth is that the killer's identity has remained elusive despite extensive efforts to track down leads. The police have interviewed several people close to Missy, including her family, friends, and colleagues, but no one was able to provide a clear motive for her murder. The search for the killer continues, with detectives constantly re-examining the footage, looking for new details that might have been missed. As the investigation continues, one question remains. Who was the person behind the mask, and why did they target Missy Bevers? The killer's cold, calculated approach to murder suggests that they were driven by something deeper, something darker. The case is far from over, and every piece of new evidence brings investigators one step closer to solving this haunting mystery. Stay with us as we delve into more theories, clues, and possible suspects that could bring us closer to the truth. The murder of Missy Bevers left an entire community in shock. She was a beloved figure in Midlothian, Texas, known for her infectious spirit, her role as a mother, and her dedication to fitness. Her death was a blow to the town, and the people who knew her found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the world around them. How could something so brutal happen to someone so kind and well-liked? Missy's family, particularly her husband Brandon, was devastated. The police released statements about the investigation, but as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, frustration began to mount for them. Not knowing what had happened to their wife, their mother, their sister, was unbearable. And as the investigation stalled, the fear that the truth would never be found grew stronger. Despite the grief, Missy's family remained determined to seek justice for her death. They launched online campaigns, made public appeals for information, and worked tirelessly to keep the case alive. They were relentless in their search for answers, hoping that someone, somewhere, had the key to unlock the mystery of Missy's murder. More than 5 years after the murder of Missy Bevers, the case remains unsolved. Despite extensive investigations, tips from the public, and numerous theories, the identity of the killer remains a mystery. The footage of the masked figure, once considered a promising lead, has still not led to an arrest. But Missy's family continues to fight for justice, hoping that one day the truth will come to light. The murder of Missy Bevers serves as a chilling reminder that even in the safest, most familiar places, danger can strike without warning. The killer may still be out there, watching, waiting, but one thing is certain. Missy's story will not be forgotten, and her family's quest for justice will continue. As the search for the killer continues, the haunting question remains. Who was the masked figure in the church, and why did they choose to take Missy's life? Join us as we explore more of the chilling theories, unanswered questions, and lingering suspicions in the case of Missy Bevers. Months passed after Missy's murder, and with each day, the investigation seemed to stall. Despite the early intensity in media coverage, the case began to fade from the headlines, overshadowed by other tragedies and criminal cases. But for those who knew Missy, the horror of her death remained fresh, and the unanswered questions continued to gnaw at their minds. Her family refused to let the case go cold. For investigators, the lack of physical evidence remained one of the most baffling aspects of the case. The surveillance footage, which had initially seemed like a breakthrough, offered little in terms of identifying the killer. The tactical gear worn by the suspect made it difficult to determine anything about their appearance. And while the figure's movements were calm and deliberate, the police couldn't find any clear connection between the masked assailant and Missy, her family, or the people in her life. The case seemed to be at a standstill. For those who followed the investigation, it appeared as if the killer was slipping further into the shadows, their identity concealed behind a mask that had become the symbol of Missy's murder. With little to go on, investigators started revisiting the footage of the masked figure, looking for new clues that might have been missed during the initial investigation. The killer's calm, controlled movements suggested a person who knew exactly what they were doing. Could they have been familiar with the church? Perhaps someone who had attended services or knew Missy's routine. One of the most striking observations came from the police. The figure's deliberate pacing, their almost meticulous movements through the church, hinted at someone with an understanding of the layout. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was well-planned. This realization led to the theory that the killer may have been stalking Missy, learning her habits before striking. But who could have done this? Why would anyone go to such lengths to carry out a planned attack on Missy, a woman beloved by her community? Some speculated that the killer could have been someone who had a personal connection to Missy, someone who had been secretly watching her, possibly waiting for an opportunity to act. This theory pointed to the idea of a more personal motive, one of jealousy, revenge, or obsession. Could Missy's killer have been someone from her past, an ex, a jealous acquaintance, or someone with an obsession? Or was it a random act of violence, driven by something more sinister? Join us as we delve deeper into the possibilities and the chilling twists in this unsolved case, where every theory opens new questions. As investigators dug deeper into Missy's personal life, a few leads raised more questions about the nature of her marriage. At the time of her murder, Missy was married to Brandon Bevers, her high school sweetheart. While the couple had 2 children together, some of those close to Missy had noticed that her relationship with Brandon had been going through some difficulties. Whispers of an affair started to circulate. Could Missy have been in an extramarital relationship that led to the murder? Or could Brandon, under the weight of their troubled relationship, have been somehow involved? While the idea of infidelity was discussed publicly, there was no concrete evidence to support it, and both Brandon and Missy's family strongly denied that there had been any affair. The police, however, couldn't rule out the possibility that someone close to Missy had been involved in her death. While there was no hard evidence connecting Brandon to the crime, investigators kept his involvement in mind. Yet, after extensive interviews with him and others who knew the family, no solid leads emerged. Still, the possibility of an emotional or domestic motive added a new layer of complexity to the case. Despite numerous tips and interviews with those closest to Missy, the police had no physical evidence to connect anyone to the crime. The church, despite being under constant surveillance, had not provided any further leads. The tactical gear the killer wore ensured that their identity was well concealed, and without any DNA, fingerprints, or additional evidence left at the scene, the investigation felt like an endless circle of dead ends. In the weeks and months following the murder, the police began to turn to the public for help. A number of sketches and images were released, including the grainy footage of the masked figure. Yet, despite the attention from the media and the widespread public interest, no one came forward with anything that could break the case wide open. With no witnesses and no physical evidence, the investigation seemed stuck in place. Public interest waned as new stories took the forefront, but the pain for Missy's family never subsided. They couldn't understand why anyone would target her, and the frustration of not knowing only deepened their grief. What could have driven someone to kill Missy in such a calculated manner? Was it revenge, a personal vendetta, or was Missy simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? As the investigation continues, more questions arise. Stay tuned as we explore the dark motivations and uncover potential new leads in this unsettling case. In 2018, 2 years after Missy's death, a new lead emerged that seemed too significant to ignore. A local fitness instructor who had taught classes at the same gym Missy worked at was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. The man, who had known Missy and occasionally interacted with her students, had a past that seemed suspiciously relevant. The man had previously been involved in a minor legal dispute, and investigators noted that he had expressed strange comments about Missy shortly before her death. Though he was not immediately considered a suspect, his connection to the fitness world raised eyebrows. Could he have been motivated by some personal or professional rivalry with Missy? Or was it a coincidence that he appeared in the investigation at such a crucial point? As the authorities dug deeper, they discovered that he had no alibi for the morning of the murder, raising further questions. Despite the heightened interest, the fitness instructor was eventually cleared of any involvement in the crime. However, this development reignited the theory that the killer was someone with a connection to Missy's professional life. The fact that she had been murdered in the church, a place where she taught classes, suggested that whoever had done this might have been familiar with the gym or had been there before. As the years went on, theories continued to multiply. Was it a case of professional jealousy, an emotional outburst from someone Missy knew, or something far more sinister, like a planned abduction? The lack of evidence made it nearly impossible to narrow down the suspects. Was the killer someone who had stalked Missy, or someone she had trusted? And most hauntingly, what happened to the killer after crime? Did they leave the area immediately, or have they been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the case to grow cold? The murder of Missy Bevers remains an open case, and despite the public interest, the killer remains free. With each passing year, the hope for resolution fades, and yet her family continues to fight for answers. They refuse to allow the case to be forgotten, even as the police seem to run out of leads. For those who knew Missy, the pain of her loss is still fresh. They struggle with the same questions that remain unanswered by the investigation. Who was the masked figure in the church? Why did Missy have to die in such a brutal, senseless way? And most importantly, will anyone ever bring the killer to justice? As the search for the truth continues, one thing remains certain. Missy's story is far from over. Her family, her friends, and the community that loved her continue to hold on to the hope that one day, the killer will be found and brought to justice. Until then, Missy Bevers will remain a haunting mystery, her name forever etched into the minds of those who seek justice for the beautiful, kind-hearted woman whose life was cut short too soon. Will the killer of Missy Bevers ever be brought to justice? Can the truth finally come to light? Stay with us as we continue to investigate this chilling case and explore new theories, clues, and developments. As time marched on and the investigation moved slowly forward, the question that seemed to resonate most was, why would anyone kill Missy Bevers? Was it simply a random act of violence, a crime of opportunity, or did something more personal drive the killer to murder this beloved fitness instructor? As investigators sifted through the evidence and re-examined old leads, the theory that stood out the most was a possibility that Missy's murder was driven by personal motives. The killer's calm and calculated movements in the church seemed to suggest that they knew Missy and her routine well. Could the killer have been someone close to her? Someone who knew her schedule, knew when she would be alone, and knew exactly where to strike? This theory leads investigators down a dark path, one where Missy's tragic death might have been a result of someone who was close to her, perhaps even someone she trusted. Was this a crime born out of jealousy, resentment, or betrayal? Was Missy involved in a conflict or dispute with someone in her life? Someone who would ultimately take such extreme measures to settle the score? The fact that Missy's killer was methodical and seemingly prepared for the attack suggested that this wasn't a crime of impulse. This was not a random act of violence. It was planned. The idea that someone could murder a well-liked, loving mother in cold blood is haunting. But what made the killer think they could escape? What did they think they had to gain from taking Missy's life? Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the case of Missy Bevers remained in the public's eye. True crime enthusiasts, amateur sleuths, and dedicated followers of the investigation kept her story alive, frequently sharing new theories and digging deeper into the circumstances surrounding the crime. This community of individuals, although they couldn't solve the case, kept hope alive for the Bevers family, who continued their tireless quest for answers. Over the years, numerous theories gained traction. Some argued that Missy's killer was someone she knew well, perhaps a jealous acquaintance or a former friend who harbored resentment. Others believed the murder was the work of a random stranger, someone who had taken the opportunity to strike when Missy was alone. The theories continued to evolve, but none could provide the crucial breakthrough the investigators desperately needed. In 2019, a documentary about the case was released, generating new interest and leading to a fresh wave of tips and leads. Many of these tips were false, but a few stood out, albeit without much concrete evidence. A new lead emerged when a local resident came forward, claiming to have seen a vehicle near the church around the time of Missy's murder. This new tip rekindled the hope that the killer might have been a local resident, someone who knew the area well and was familiar with Missy's routine. Yet, despite all the theories, new insights, and public interest, the killer remained unknown. Each new lead added to the growing pile of dead ends. With every passing year, the frustration mounted. The fact that Missy's killer remained unidentified left a profound sense of injustice hanging over her family, her community, and investigators who worked so tirelessly to bring answers. After years of unanswered questions, the mystery of Missy Bevers' murder remains unsolved. With so many theories and false leads, where's the truth lie? Could the killer still be hiding in plain sight? Stay tuned as we continue to follow the investigation, uncover more clues, and explore the chilling possibilities of what might have happened that morning. The killer may still be out there, but one thing is certain: Missy's story is far from over. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case is the identity of the masked killer. The fact that the perpetrator had taken such careful measures to conceal their identity raises several important questions. Was the killer someone who knew Missy intimately, someone who harbored an obsession with her, or perhaps someone who had been stalking her for some time? The chilling precision with which the crime was carried out, down to the tactical gear, the methodical movements through the church, and the ability to strike with no witnesses, suggested a person who had a strong sense of control over the situation. The killer's decision to wear a mask and gloves left no physical trace behind, and this coldness further contributed to the mystery. It was as if they had been planning the murder for weeks or months, waiting for the perfect moment to act. There was speculation about whether the mask itself was meant to confuse the police or mislead investigators. The face of the killer remained hidden behind a mask. But could that be a clue in itself? Was the mask part of a larger psychological game, a way for the killer to remain anonymous while toying with law enforcement? The public's fascination with the masked figure only grew over the years, with people becoming obsessed with the idea of uncovering the person behind the mask. But despite the attention, the killer's identity remained a mystery. While the police continued their investigation, Missy's family endured the emotional toll of having a loved one taken from them without explanation. Her husband, Brandon Bevers, was devastated by the loss of his wife and mother of their children. The constant public scrutiny, combined with the emotional devastation, weighed heavily on him. Yet, in every interview he gave, Brandon expressed hope that one day the truth would come to light. His pain was palpable, but his determination to find justice for Missy never wavered. The Bevers family's fight for closure became a symbol of resilience. They worked tirelessly to keep the case in the public eye, participating in news interviews, appearing in documentaries, and using social media to reach out to the public for help. Missy's daughters, too, grew up without their mother, and the emotional impact of her death affected them for years to come. The question remained: who could have done this to Missy and why? The family's grief, coupled with the public's ongoing demand for answers, created a mounting pressure on investigators to solve the case. Every new theory, every false lead, only added to the growing frustration. But as Missy's family held on to the hope of closure, the case continued to unfold, still unsolved, still unfinished. 5 years after Missy's death, the killer's identity remains shrouded in mystery. Who was the person behind the mask, and why did they target Missy Bevers? Could the killer still be hiding among us? As the investigation lingers on, the question continues to haunt everyone involved. Stick around as we continue to explore the clues, the leads, and the haunting unanswered questions surrounding this cold-blooded murder. The murder of Missy Bevers has become one of the most chilling, unsolved cases in recent history. While the search for the killer continues, the case grows colder with each passing year. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the tireless work of Missy's family, and the public's fascination with the case, the killer remains elusive. Missy's story is a tragic reminder of how quickly life can change, and how even the most seemingly safe places can harbor danger. Her family still waits for justice, still hopes for the truth to come to light. And as the case continues, Missy's memory endures, her name forever tied to a mystery that may never be solved. The hunt for the killer remains open, but whether the truth will ever be found is a question that still hangs in the air. In the years following Missy Bevers' brutal murder, the investigation appeared to stall, but that doesn't mean there weren't new developments. One theory that began to gain traction in the public centered around the idea that the killer was someone within the local community. The fact that Missy's killer was able to navigate the church's halls without anyone noticing or raising alarms suggested familiarity with the building and its schedule. Could the killer have been someone who attended the church, or even someone who had a regular presence there? The theory of a local connection became more believable when investigators dug deeper into the people Missy interacted with regularly. The community that surrounded the Creekside Church was relatively small, and Missy's circle of friends, family, and fitness clients knew her well. She was a staple in the community, not just for her fitness classes, but for the warmth and kindness she radiated. Was there someone who, perhaps driven by resentment or hidden animosity, used their position of trust in the community to hide in plain sight and strike at Missy? Investigators revisited interviews with church staff, gym members, and even people who had interacted with Missy in passing. Was there someone who seemed out of place? Someone who might have used Missy's trust against her? A deep dive into local records and personal connections raised more questions than answers. One troubling lead involved a person who had been caught trying to access the church during odd hours, but there was no evidence linking them directly to the crime scene. The more investigators explored, the more they realized that the case wasn't just a random act of violence. It was personal. Could the killer be someone who knew Missy, someone hiding in plain sight? The idea that the perpetrator was a member of the local community adds another layer of fear and complexity to the case. Join us as we dig deeper into the possibilities of this chilling theory, examining new clues and unexpected leads that may point to someone much closer to the victim than anyone ever thought. In late 2020, a new clue emerged when an anonymous tip came in suggesting that Missy had been stalked in the days leading up to her death. According to the tip, Missy had mentioned feeling uneasy about someone watching her, though she hadn't shared any specific details. This unsettling revelation caught investigators' attention and led them to revisit the case from a fresh angle. Stalking cases often involve a pattern of behavior, one that can escalate over time. Could the killer have been watching Missy for weeks before making their move? Investigators examined Missy's phone records and social media activity, looking for signs of strange or unexplainable interactions. Did someone leave cryptic messages on her accounts or make repeated attempts to contact her? This new clue created a sense of dread. Was the killer someone who had been lurking in the shadows for weeks or even months, planning their attack and waiting for the perfect moment to strike? If the killer had been stalking Missy, it would have meant that the murder wasn't a random act of violence, but the result of a carefully planned, deeply personal crime. Yet, despite this chilling theory, there was still no concrete evidence to confirm that Missy had been stalked. The tip remained a theory, one that left investigators and Missy's family in suspense. If she had been stalked, who was responsible and why had they chosen her? The most prominent piece of evidence in the case remains the footage of the masked killer, who appeared to enter the church undetected, methodically walking through the building and carrying out the murder with unsettling precision. The person's deliberate movements and careful attention to detail suggested a person with experience and knowledge of the church's layout. But the mask obscured everything: gender, age, physical characteristics, all the critical details that could have led to an identification. In the years since Missy's murder, experts on criminal behavior and forensic psychology began to analyze the footage in the hopes of drawing new conclusions about the killer's personality and motivations. Some suggested that the killer was attempting to control the narrative of the crime, hiding their identity to avoid being identified and to protect themselves from the law. Was the mask a psychological tool meant to create fear and confusion in both the victim and the authorities? Or was it simply a methodical attempt to cover their tracks, ensuring that there would be no evidence left behind? Several theories circulated about the significance of the mask. Was it meant to disguise the killer's identity, or was it symbolic? Did the killer wear the mask to disassociate themselves from the crime, as if to say that they weren't personally involved in the violence they were committing? The mask became a symbol of the killer's anonymity and their ability to remain hidden, a puzzle that continued to taunt investigators and the public alike. What could the mask reveal about the killer's true identity? Could it hold the key to unlocking this haunting case? Investigators continue to search for answers, and the chilling presence of the masked figure lingers as a constant reminder that Missy's killer may still be hiding in plain sight. Follow along as we explore the possible motivations behind the killer's disguise and dive deeper into the psychological games they may be playing. Despite the media attention, the involvement of independent investigators, and new public tips, the case remained unresolved. The constant shift in theories, from the idea of a local connection to stalking or a personal vendetta, left both the public and investigators feeling as though they were chasing ghosts. Every new lead seemed to add complexity, but not clarity. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the investigation was the frustration felt by Missy's family. As each year passed without resolution, they were forced to confront the reality that they might never know the truth. They had waited for years for the killer to be brought to justice, but with each passing day, the odds of solving the case seemed to grow slimmer. The public pressure on law enforcement continued to build, but no definitive breakthroughs came. Would Missy's family ever have the closure they desperately needed? Would anyone ever be held accountable for the crime that had stolen Missy's life and shattered her family? The wait for answers felt interminable, and with each new theory, the gap between suspicion and truth only seemed to grow wider. Despite all the frustration, there is still a glimmer of hope. As long as Missy Bevers' case remains open, there is a possibility that the truth will eventually come to light. New technology, fresh eyes on the case, and the continued persistence of Missy's family might one day uncover the answers that have eluded so many for so long. The case of Missy Bevers remains an unsolved mystery, and the investigation continues. While new leads come and go, one thing is clear. The quest for justice does not end with the passage of time. As long as there are unanswered questions, there will be those who continue to fight for answers, those who refuse to let Missy's story fade into the shadows. The search for Missy's killer continues. Could the mask hold the key to uncovering the truth? Will new developments lead to an arrest, or is the killer still out there, hiding in plain sight? Stay with us as we continue to follow the case, dive deeper into the investigation, and explore the chilling theories that might finally bring the truth to light. It has been years since Missy Bevers was murdered in that church, and yet her absence is still felt every day by the community, her family, and those who once called her friend. The pursuit of justice continues, but with each passing year, the possibility of finding the killer grows more uncertain. Still, the questions remain unanswered and haunting. The impact of Missy's murder on her family is immeasurable. Her husband, Brandon Bevers, who was devastated by the sudden and violent loss of his wife, continues to struggle with the grief of not knowing why or how this happened. Though he never publicly blamed anyone, the pain of losing Missy under such tragic circumstances continues to torment him. Brandon has been steadfast in his efforts to bring Missy's killer to justice. He has spoken at length about how difficult it has been to raise their children without Missy, to navigate daily life with the cloud of her unresolved death hanging over them. For Brandon, every moment without closure feels like a betrayal. How could someone who loved his wife, who was such an integral part of their community, be taken in such a brutal and senseless way? Every public appeal for information, every interview, and every social media post hoping for a breakthrough is not just about getting justice. It's about finding a way to heal the brokenness that has been left behind. The Bevers family has continued to fight for Missy, ensuring that her name is never forgotten. Even as the case becomes colder and colder, the years pass, and the Bevers family still searches for answers. The killer remains unidentified, and each year, it feels like justice is slipping further out of reach. How much longer can they wait for closure? Despite the stalled progress in the case, one of the most surprising aspects of Missy's murder has been the role social media, podcasts, and public interest have played. The power of the internet has kept the case alive, even as the investigation itself slowed. True crime enthusiasts, documentary filmmakers, and amateur sleuths have helped to keep the case in the public eye. Every new podcast episode, blog post, or discussion on Reddit about Missy's case brings a new wave of hope, as someone might come forward with crucial information or a new perspective. In 2019, the True Crime Garage podcast covered Missy Bevers' case in detail, reigniting public interest in the investigation. The podcast explored various theories, revisited the church surveillance footage, and interviewed experts in criminal behavior. It reignited the question, could a fresh set of eyes on the case be what's needed to crack it open? The response to the podcast was overwhelming. The online community became active, analyzing every detail, revisiting every piece of evidence, and re-examining possible suspects. The podcast and other media coverage opened the door for more tips, even though most of them were inconclusive. But the sense of urgency among listeners and the public became palpable. Everyone wanted answers. The question now is whether the continued spotlight on the case, driven by podcasts and social media, will eventually lead to the breakthrough that law enforcement needs. Can a case that has stagnated for so long finally be solved by the public's efforts? As the case continues to unfold, one of the major questions that still looms large is, was Missy's murder a random act of violence, or did someone close to her have a personal motive for wanting her dead? In the years since her death, investigators have explored both possibilities. The random act theory suggests that the killer simply saw an opportunity. Missy was alone in the church, a vulnerable target in the early hours of the morning. The church, after all, was an unlikely place for a violent crime. Missy's killer might have taken advantage of the church's emptiness, striking at a time when no one would be around to witness the crime. On the other hand, the theory that Missy was murdered because of personal vendetta adds an entirely different layer to the investigation. Did the killer know Missy? Did they harbor some sort of grudge against her, a jealousy or resentment that built up over time? The calculated nature of the crime, the precision with which the killer executed their plan, seems to suggest that this wasn't just a random act of violence. This theory implies that Missy's murder was more than just opportunistic. It was personal. Was Missy's killer someone who knew her well? Someone with a deep-seated anger or jealousy? Or was it a stranger driven by random violence? The personal connection theory grows stronger as new clues surface. Could the truth lie within Missy's personal life, her relationships, or her past? Join us as we explore the possibilities, examining every angle and reanalyzing the chilling details of the case that remain unanswered. Another aspect of the case that has kept investigators and the public intrigued is the church itself. The fact that Missy was murdered in a place she was familiar with, a place she had attended regularly, suggests that the location may have been significant. Could the church have been more than just a random setting? Was it chosen specifically because it was familiar to Missy and those who knew her? Missy was often at the church for her fitness classes, and it's possible that her killer knew this. The church, being a public building, was an unlikely place for a crime, which may have made it seem like a perfect spot for the killer to strike. Could the location of the crime be tied to Missy's relationships, perhaps with someone within the church community? Was there a hidden motive behind choosing that specific location to end her life? One theory suggests that Missy's killer could have been someone who attended the church regularly, someone who knew her routines and could predict when she would be there. The fact that the killer was able to enter the church without detection and carry out the murder suggests that they had a level of comfort with the building. Was it someone who had been watching Missy for days, waiting for the right moment to strike? Could the church itself be the key to unlocking this case? Was the location chosen for its familiarity, or does it hold deeper significance in Missy's murder? The investigation into the church and its community continues, as we dig deeper into the possibility that someone from Missy's circle of acquaintances was involved. Stay tuned as we continue to explore new theories and fresh clues that might reveal the truth. As time passes and the investigation continues to inch forward, the possibility of finding justice for Missy Bevers feels like a distant dream. But the Bevers family continues to push for closure, fighting for justice in every way they can. The public's continued interest in the case brings new hope, and every year that passes without resolution only strengthens their resolve to find the truth. Will the killer be found? Will the truth ever come to light? Or will Missy's case remain one of the many unsolved mysteries that haunt the world? A case that never fully fades into the past? The murder of Missy Bevers is a tragedy that has left a mark on her family, her friends, and her community. Though the killer remains unidentified, Missy's story is far from over. The search for justice continues, and her memory endures through the relentless fight for answers. In the end, we can only hope that the truth will be revealed, that the masked killer will be unmasked, and that justice will finally be served for Missy Bevers, the woman who was taken far too soon. Until then, her story will remain one of the most chilling and haunting unsolved mysteries of our time. The mystery of Missy Bevers' death remains unsolved, but the search for her killer is far from over. Join us as we continue to follow the investigation, dive deeper into new theories, and uncover the chilling truths that still lie hidden in the shadows.